you're on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's always a pleasure to be here with you. Um, let them know that I am live on YouTube here, Instagram. Instagram is having, hold on, trying to get Instagram on. Okay. Instagram is checking their connections here. And hopefully we will have our live stream going on here. Go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. Like, don't forget that I am in the building. The Lawyer Henderson Show is live. Man, we got a lot to talk about. We got a lot to talk about. We got a lot to talk about on the Lawyer Henderson Show. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. You know, ScrewTube like to just mess up my channel. ScrewTube just like to just basically ignore the fact that I'm getting a lot of subscribers, and YouTube just like to basically remove them. They try to claim, oh, it's about this and it's about that. You know, they're lying. You see, we've been in the black media, we've been basically censored, if you will. Because, see, in order to keep a people brainwashed, you got to keep a people out of their mind. You got to keep a people in a state of delusion and false, uh, personality. And that's exactly what the white screen media is about. And so here come the new voices of black media, where we're basically getting black folks on code, the grassroots level. They're upset about it. That's the reason why now, as we've dealt with white people and their ancestors, we have to deal now with the slave master children. And one of the things that we have to do now is understand that it's a new day. That's the reason that I'm doing my commentary tonight on the civil rights generation. The time is up. No more singing that old time religion. Let's give it up. Remember, we were singing that old time religion back in the days, back in slave days. Black folks were singing that old time religion. Y'all remember that? Y'all was up there singing that old time religion. The civil rights generation also had brought that old time religion into the churches. Give me that old time religion. Civil rights generation basically had a history of saying that, okay, I can get black folks to go and vote. I can get black folks to mobilize and rally and protest and march, got signs. And what has that accomplished here? You understand? I get it. I mean, if we're going to talk about the younger black generation, talking about going out there, burning down buildings and stuff, that's fine. But why was our people back in the days singing this old time religion? Okay, what was that doing? Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. See, back in those days, what was going on? You see, let me tell you how these songs that we were singing in the church, how they were old lynching ritual songs. They were white supremacy lynching songs. Give me that old time religion. White people were basically their ancestors was lynching us. And then after that, they would go to the church and start singing these hymns. And by the way, the Mormon church still with its crowd, which is choir rather, sing this old time religion. Talk black to me now. During the 1800s and early 1900s, old time religion was popular at the uh, at the time that they had the meeting at Ann Arbor, which would draw Christians to the event. The meeting at Ann Arbor. They talk a lot about that in history class as well. But they don't go in really into the spiritual tune and sound as to why they were singing these songs. These songs were produced during the time of Reconstruction. Some of them Jim Crow era and Civil Rights era, what have you. During the 1800s and 1900s, we were singing, give me that old time religion, give me that old time religion. And that went into our churches where the black pastors were saying that this is going to be the songs that will get us out of slavery and Jim Crow and all these other types of discrimination. This is what our pastors was teaching us here. And sometimes then our mothers would tell us we got to go to church and go ahead and go to church and stuff like that. And you asked her why, and she said, well, Lord loves you, baby. Okay. But was we practice what we worshiping? Was we worshiping God, or was we worshiping a white supremacy ideology when we sung these songs of giving me that old time religion? And it's also, if you hearken back to the songs that we were singing in the 1800s, you know, you got to understand why a lot of black men, when they see the truth, they leave the church. We have to leave the black pastors then empty-handed. The civil rights generation then taught us that we have to do three basic things, and that was just to go to school, get a degree. They taught us that we had to go to church, praise the Lord, and they told us that we have to march on Dr. King's Day and vote Democrat. This was just being taught to us without thinking about, well, wait a minute, who made these decisions? And why are these decisions only been made? You see, that's the reason why I said today in this particular podcast that the podcast title is Civil Rights Generation. The time is up. No more singing that old time religion. If we're going to talk about the younger black generation being confused and basically being disorganized, what kind of organization did the civil rights generation have as far as moving us away from certain types of issues? You will say, well, we had Dr. King, we had Malcolm X, and we did. And brilliant. Speaking of Dr. King and Malcolm X, if you basically tune in a little bit, I'll talk about my commentary about both of their wives and how women today do not seek to basically want to have a peak in value, that the model with her booty out is now is supposed to be peak value here. We'll have that commentary coming up. But the civil rights generation has to understand that civil rights may have gotten certain types of people within society, jobs, and stuff like that. But we can no longer keep playing white folks' games. Unfortunately, our wealth is still at $1.3 trillion a year. We can no longer keep playing their games. And so, therefore, people are upset. Oh, you can't be talking about your past. They don't want the past basically also taught in school about Black people's past. And why is that? Because a people who don't know their history and their culture and their past is bound to repeat it. And this is the problem with Black folks. That's the reason why I want to leave you with the quote that a person who convinced you not to look back at your past has won. You agree, so your future has been compromised. End quote. And the reason why your future has been compromised is because that person has already taught you that this is going to be your future. Your future is going to be stagnant. It's going to basically go nowhere. Okay? We often basically, a lot of times, our mothers, all due respect, I mean, we should love our mothers to death. Oftentimes, that they don't give us a realistic reality on life. You know, you go to your dad gonna tell you all day because he grew up in the experiment of like getting harassed by the police. You know, your dad gonna be the first one to say, "Man, them crackers pull me over again." you know, So and so, religion sometimes step in our way of progress, and we'll talk about that today as to how. Now, the ideal here is that we want to move away from the civil rights generation's old time religion because, like I said, back in those days, in the 1800s, they were lynching you and singing that old time religion. You did? I'm just saying. All the songs that we were basically singing in church are songs of lynching rituals that white people did in the 1800s, most of them. Amazing Grace is another one, you know. And we basically, that history taught us in 1927 at the time of Jim Crow segregation, you know. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was all. Those songs were basically were written by certain types of people, specifically white folks, who knew that they were doing wrong and chose to do it. You understand? Amazing Grace, by the way, was written by a guy by the name of what's this guy's name? Um, Laurie London. Was that his name? You had me out there in the chat room. I think it was Laurie London. Laurie London participated in the transatlantic slave trade. Okay. The person who sung that. No, I'm sorry. I think it's the man who got who wrote the song. He got the whole world in his hand in 1927. You know, when he did that, no, was it him? No, I think it was the guy that did written the Amazing Grace song. But anyway, he participated in the transatlantic slave trade at the time that he written this song Amazing Grace. And it was like these were songs, like I said, that they were basically singing at the time that they were lynching blacks. You see, that's the reason why Amos Wilson taught us is that, no, you don't want that old time religion. Because in those days they were lynching you, they were Jim Crowing you, they were basically hanging you. You understand? And therefore, we see these songs into the black churches. If you really want to know why you came as women to get your husbands to go to church, We know the history of the church, you know. So a lot of times having knowing the history of religion that we basically as black men do, we often try to avoid going to church. you know And your wife sat there, come on, baby, you going to church? No, I gotta cut the yard or something. I got I got some stuff to do. Andy next door, he want me to come over and help him to, to build up to help him with the fence or something. We often make up excuses as to why we don't want to go to church. You see, I'm saying. But, I understand for women, it's more of a spiritual being. It's more of trying to basically balance out their spiritual personality within themselves. It's also about having faith as they think. It's about moreover to have faith in God and to have religion and stuff. For men, it's like, okay, yeah, I believe in the spirit. I believe that God exists. Okay. Now if I go out here and go ahead and go to the bar and drink some some vodka. you know, it's very different. We have different types of ways of thinking. You know what I'm saying? And so women are more just just this is what they're going to do. They plan it out real quick, and and then they just go and they keep a schedule. Men, we're not like that. We don't often keep schedules. We're like, okay, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. All right, boy. Yeah, boy. Come on, let's go ahead and talk. All right, then. I'll see you there, then, boy. Boy, you crazy. You see, that means then that we basically deal with our planning with each other. Whereas women, sometimes they have to go over notes and all this. They have to plan. Guys, if we say we're going to do something, sometimes we might be lying about it, you know. But we don't have to just go ahead and just plan. We often don't. We just basically just hook up. Oh, yeah, man. Come, dude, I'll be there. Man, you said going to be there at 7 o'clock. Okay, I'll come. Man, boy, you crazy. But, we basically, like I said, we plan through excitement, through personality, through, what I'm saying, just interaction. Okay. And women don't really do that themselves a lot. Okay. Um, and that's what makes us different here. Okay. But no, to get back on the subject though, the old time religion, like these songs, like in during Jim Crow, and these songs that our preacher was telling us to sing, in the churches. This basically also was the kind of commitment that Black people in the civil rights generation and others and Black folks at that time, they were agreeing to teach us as their kids white people lynching ritual songs. In fact, the Mormon church continued to then practice and they sing songs from the 1800s. Okay, you remember when Barack Obama he went up against in his second term with Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney was from the Mormon faith, and they have certain types of beliefs. One of their interesting beliefs in the Mormon church there was the fact that they deal with certain types of things that in the regular Christian church that we oftentimes did not really hear about. We knew as men that a lot of things in religion didn't make sense, but we went along with it. But in the Mormon faith, as in Christianity in general, you have to basically just believe. Okay, and it's nothing wrong with that. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with your religion here. I'm just trying to tell you and make a point about how religion and white supremacy, that religion and the ideology of songs and stuff like that in hymns teaches us basically to respect and deal with white supremacy on a way into which it doesn't matter if they lynch you, shot you, killed you in the street like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, anybody. The religion and the faith come back and say we have to forgive, but the question is, how much do we have to forgive, as far as we know that these white supremacists are killing us? Okay, there is nothing then that basically a universal law within faith that teaches us that we have to continue to allow our oppressors to kill us constantly. At some point, religion have to be suspended. Period. Okay. One of the beliefs that the Mormon Church believe is the sin and atonement. Mormons believe that Adam's transgression was a noble act that made it possible for humans to become mortal, a necessary step on the path to exaltation to godhood. They think that Christ's atonement secures immortality for virtually all people, whether they repent and believe or not. Okay? Now, you're supposed to basically, in Christian faith, to believe that either you go to hell or you go to heaven. Okay? But what the Mormons are saying is that, I mean, if you repent for what you've done, you can basically get into heaven too, I think, is what it's saying here. But the article goes on to say that biblically, however, there was nothing noble about Adam's sin, which was not a stepping stone to godhood, but rather brought nothing but sin, misery, and death to mankind. Now that's in Genesis 3:16-19 and Romans 5:12-14. Jesus' atonement for the sin of all who would trust him for salvation. That goes on to talk about that in Isaiah 53:6, John 1:29, 2 Corinthians 5:21, and then Peter and John also. So you have the Mormon faith basically having a different perspective on how to say that you're supposed to be living as far as Christ, but yet have basically continued with the same, you know, white supremacist lynching ritual songs that we see today, that we basically are singing today in the church. And basically they agree with that. And then there you even got some black folks in the Mormon church. And I was like, wow. I was like, black people, I'm saying, see, when you don't know history and culture or whatever, you're bound to repeat the same mistakes. You're bound to make the same kind of mistakes as well. And so religion oftentimes is used as a scapegoat for white people to justify the oppression of us, like they did with lynching. And of course, after slavery, we forgave them. We forgave them for sicking their dogs on it during civil rights. We forgave them for a lot of the murder and the crimes and stuff like that, and killing of us. We constantly have done that. At some point, white people have to go ahead and repent. You understand, for their sins. You cannot keep on forgiving, and forgiving when a race who have had so much history of murder, raping, rob, enslaving people is continuing to do it and then justifying it as they're doing it, as they're continuing to do it. At some point, your religion is suspended. You understand? And what I mean by suspended, at some point, your religion is basically lying to you. And therefore, it must be removed to the side and say, wait a minute, we got to start arming ourselves and we got to start thinking like the white supremacists when they're shooting and killing us down. You understand? And so that's the reason why we're moving away from that old time religion that our our grandparents had, or the civil rights generation and the generation before them had, you know. But see, the uh, grandparents of the civil rights generation, they understood, moreover, than the civil rights generation understood, because at the time they had Marcus Garvey, they had W.E.B. Du Bois, they had those guys, those black men who were really serious about liberation. You understand? And so now we're just playing games. And so now that's the reason why we have gotten to the point where voting is not something that is necessary for the black community. You see, they've been knocking all on our doors. They've been sending us out in mails, and they've been, even having people coming to your homes talking about, that you vote, that you vote. Go ahead and go out there and vote, that you vote. Hey, hey, good vote. Because basically, as they will not tell you, is that we basically did not really vote, as they're trying to say that we did, heavily for Joe Biden. If you really look at the situation here, we basically have came to the end of just listening to white people talk about voting. In fact, you had you had I think a woman or something, a black woman, I think, who was actually charged for voting fraud at the booths. And I'm going to get the story there, but I think she was charged. I think she was a worker there. See, they always have a black person who is the downfall. See, they basically want us to go out and vote. And then when we do it, they come back with some charge and say it's black folks' fault. You see, and that's the reason why, because we have basically made it clear in the younger black generation and grassroots that we're participating in an illegitimate system is the reason then why we have not made progress. See, when you don't participate in an illegitimate system, then the system change. Like we told you about Dr. King, when Dr. King basically lined those black people up back in the 1960s because of the Montgomery boycott, bus cut, and how we just basically decided to stop riding on the buses. The whole entire transportation system changed. You understand? What was the lesson learned from that? Not participating in a illegitimate racist system. You see, and that's what black folks in this generation has to learn. That's what we have to understand. That was the most important thing in the civil rights era. How Dr. King basically lined Negroes up and said that we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. That defeated the Montgomery bus system. And yet, we have not looked at those strategies in order to make progress now. We're still sitting, as Dr. Claude Anderson pointed out, with $1.3 trillion a year. We can no longer continue to operate on that kind of money. You might think it's a lot of money in a sense because of 1.2 trillion, but hell, you got 41 million or more black folks in America. I mean, just evenly spread all that over, and then the disproportionate numbers of black folks who have the millions and the few who have the billions, you will find that the vast majority of black people are making less than $31,000 in this country. So what black middle class are we talking about here? Removing ourselves away from this old time religion means that we have to think in terms of not voting, but are thinking in terms of what? Business and cooperation of black economics. We have to think in terms of what they call cooperating in economics or whatever. And so that's what's going to get us out of this mess. By year 2053, as white folks become a minority in their own nation, Their whole prophecy, along with their old time religion, is to make sure that, yeah, they're recognizing, as Joe Biden had explained, that they're going to be a minority in their own nation. You see, but that doesn't mean that white folks is going to give up on our oppression, on their racism towards us. They're now basically working, as they often did in the history of the Hispanics, is working with the Hispanics to make sure that black folks are kept in a segmented labor market, as Dr. Claude Anderson points out. They're literally going to be a minority in this country. And what they're afraid is that the Hispanics are going to somehow team up with black folks. And we already told you, we caution this so-called black and brown coalition. The Asians are making their move into China, and they basically is buying up the African debt. They're trying to basically do a lot of things in the United States that's going to put black folks also in trouble. And eventually, they're going to win the war against the American West. So here comes the fact that if we basically do not do anything about our economic system now, we are going to be basically back in slavery. By 2053, with no wealth, what can we buy? What can we spend? The ideal here is that a lot of these things that have stood in our way of making progress, the black man often left the black Christian church because mentally it kept us down from doing things for ourselves. And so now we have to understand is that after we're disagreeing with the civil rights generation strategy. That's all we're doing on the grassroots level. All we're doing is disagreeing with their strategy. That's no problem with disagreement. Their strategy for years was to integrate and assimilate and amalgamate with white people, thinking that they're going to be progress made. The black grassroots, and as Dr. Claude Anderson points out, our decision is to either give us our tangibles, our reparations, and also let us aggregate wealth within your system, or we deem the system what? An illegitimate one. That's just point blank simple. Okay? It doesn't mean that we dislike the civil rights generation. All it means is we just disagree with them. Okay? And disagreeing with them and not participating in their voting, as they have allowed Jews and other white liberals to infiltrate the civil rights organizations like the NAACP and Urban League, keeps black folks in a segmented labor market, and also keep us in a situation where we are, as what Dr. Claude Anderson described, a permanent underclass. The black grassroots and the new voices of black media is teaching us how we have to move ourselves away from the ideology of the civil rights movement. Not to say that it wasn't a monumental moment in civil rights. That's not what we're saying here. Okay? Now, before we go on to talk about this old time religion, let's talk about Reconstruction for a minute. Remember, if you rehash back in a lot of commentaries that we've done, Reconstruction era was a period after the American Civil War from 1865 to 1877. Remember? During which the U.S. grappled with the challenges of reintegrating into the Union the states that had succeeded in determining the legal status of African Americans. The purpose of Reconstruction was to help the South to become part of the Union. Okay? And in those times, we had civil rights laws on the books, 1865, 1866, 1870s, and all these other years. And Dr. Claude Anderson pointed out even in the 1700s, we had some certain laws as well. But those laws, of course, were civil rights laws that says that black folks were supposed to be participating in the economic system of this nation. And so white people start to ignore these laws as they're doing today to undermine us. And that's the reason why voting in the system is what? Illegitimate. You're not following the laws that is already on the books. So having a run with John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock here in Congress, these two guys are not going to change anything. And so therefore, what we say here is that they're having this huge Senate race down here in Georgia. They're trying to get us to think, oh, this is the most this is the most important time. We should go out there and vote and vote. Go ahead and vote on January the 5th and sending you all kinds of brochures. Go out and vote, man. You go and vote. The pandemic relief stimulus package. Go out and vote, Nick, man. I mean, go out and vote. You like, damn. You never ever had white people ask you to vote so much in your lifetime. At a time when they say, no, you niggas don't show up at the poll, I'm gonna let you. Don't be coming out here trying to vote. Those times were different because we were trying to get those known races that actually showed their racism real deep. We were trying to get them out of office. You know, we were trying to get your George Wallaces out of office and all these types of people, your Strom Thurmans. That's when we were trying to really show up and vote. We were trying to get those real strong racists out of office. So that was a important time and moment to go out and vote because they were very extreme. And there was some, of course, in the Democratic Party that was also more extreme. In fact, it was the Democratic Party that helped change and brought white supremacy to the forefront. It was the Democratic Party, of course, at that time in the 1800s that basically told all the other people, white folks in this nation, that this is a white person's country, that it's supposed to be ran only by white men. And that's the reason why you only had only white men, with the exception of one biracial black person who was basically acting just like white men. Okay? So you really didn't have what? A black man who basically was molded by the black community ever being president. So we're still playing the same game here. But the Amazing Grace, I'm sorry, I found the article here. I told you last time here. Amazing Grace is a Christian hymn published in 1779 with the words written in 1772 by an English poet and Anglican clergyman John Newton. He became involved in the slave trade. That was one of the reasons of writing the song, you see. And these are songs that at the time that we were being lynched and at the time of Jim Crow segregation, our pastors were basically telling us to sing these songs still today in these churches. That's the reason why when a black man learns the truth, he often leaves the church. Unfortunately for y'all, I'm sorry. You know, this is truth hour. Because as Malcolm pointed out, if you go to a Negro church and that Negro church it has on its wall a white Jesus, white angels, a white God, that Negro church is preaching white nationalism. You know, Malcolm was very firm in talking about that. It goes on to say there in the article that black enslaved population in the U.S. between 1790s and the 1880s, there were almost 700,000 slaves in the U.S. in 1790, which was about 18% of the population. See, we basically, hadn't we not been killed off and lynched and murdered, We went through all kinds of things that no other race who have abandoned their economies to come to the United States and get some status, despite their illegal immigrants. We went through the most horrific history in the world, and yet everybody else is feeding off in us. And let's not get that twisted. That's the reason why I'm reminded of all the black folks when they agree with people talking about, oh, everybody went through slavery and all this. Nah, stop playing games. Nobody else has a history of dealing with anything like black people, foundational black men and women in this country. We have a unique history unlike anybody else. You talking about that time when white people were enslaving white people in Europe, not the same here. Okay? That had nothing to do with black folks. The white man was enslaving himself in Europe, has nothing to do with him enslaving us, and also has nothing to do with also the Arabs' enslavement of us. Sorry. I had to, let that down because the Nation of Islam, I know that they're Muslim, all due respect, but we have to also deal with the Arabs' enslavement of us. And of course, Farrakhan did point that out about the Muslim enslavement first. Now, the song Precious Lord, remember that song? Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on. That song, of course, as you know, it was written by Thomas Darcy. But they're trying to say that the original song the melody, the tune of it, came in around the 1800s, still at the time that it was like 10 or 15 years before Reconstruction. Okay. I think that time where America was just territories at that point. But we have a lot of history with these songs in our churches here. Amazing Grace. He has the whole world in his hand. Precious Lord. What's the other one I was talking about? That old time religion. The old time religion was one of the main white supremacist, you know, song rituals. So the Black Christian Church then have to deal with the fact that we're singing songs, that basically is celebrating what happened to us in the 1800s. Even if it basically is a innocent progress. And the Mormon church, they still sing these songs because this is their their way of basically going back to those days of what the ancestors did. And then after the lynching of us, they would go to their own churches, give me that old time religion, give me that old time. They basically will sing those songs after just lynching us. Actually, like I said, these black laws, the black codes during the Jim Crow era, after just, shooting a black person in cold, blood, you go back and you sing those white rituals, you see. If you sung those white rituals in the 1800s and the 1920s, like give me that old time religion and all this old stuff that we still do in our churches. Well, how can we get past our people of talking about something real tangible, if we don't basically remove away from those ritual songs that basically was celebrated by the white supremacists at that time? The KKK and all these people who sung those songs that our pastors are now teaching us are we saying in our churches. And so therefore, the civil rights generation should now be more careful as to basically allowing pastors, even themselves, to allow certain types of songs to be sung. When I go to a church and they start singing, "Give me that old time religion," I run the hell out of those churches. I'm sorry, because Amos Wilson pointed out at that time they were lynching you, they were hanging you. So I don't want no old time religion. Okay, so if your pastors are basically singing that, I mean your choir is singing that. Um, if you see me walk out the church door, do not get offended, because I don't want to be reminded of that old time religion. I'm sorry to say. No, but during the time of this era where we were celebrating and using the churches for freedom, there's Jim Crow laws or what have you. We were singing these ritual songs. Okay, some of these songs, like I said, the Mormon Church, they still saying these songs. They basically, you got, like I said, you got black folks in the Mormon Church, and unfortunately, they have no problem with singing the songs, and they have no problem with joining these churches that sing these songs, that whose belief is still the same, like those people, and like the white ancestors or white people's ancestors. Like I said, when they lynched us and stuff like that, they're basically still doing this in the Mormon Church. They have, like I said, they have the hope. You got black folks there just like singing along with the crowd, and don't know the history of where these songs were originated from. That's amazing. That's the reason why I was like, man, our people just hate history. We hate we hate to talk about ourselves. We think it's an embarrassment to talk about our history and confront white folks on it. That's foolish. That's dumb. That's cowardice. The ideal is that why would we basically sing these songs in our churches? Speaking of the Mormon Church, they said here about Jesus Christ. Mormons believe that Jesus Christ was the firstborn spirit child of the Heavenly Father and the Heavenly Mother. Jesus then progressed to deity in the spirit world. He was later physically conceived in Mary's womb as the literal only begotten Son of God, the Father in the flesh, though many present day Mormons remain somewhat vague as to how this occurred. Well, the Christian church says something the same way that doesn't really make sense, but and I'm not defending the Mormon church, but the ideal here is that, in fact, I'm more worried about the Mormon church beliefs here. Okay. And the article goes on to say, like I said before, that biblically, however, the description of Jesus as the only begotten refers to his being the Father's unique, one of a kind Son for all eternity with the same divine nature as the Father. That's in John 1:14. But see, here's my question to white people who are listening to me, my white audience. You all believe this, and yet we're getting shot and killed and all this on the street, and yet you'll go into your churches and sing these songs. Okay? So the question is, do black people and white people have a different type of Christian beliefs here? Okay? Because we basically get whooped and beat by the police as black folks, okay? And then we go on to our presidents go out to other countries and pretend that our nation is liberal. you can you go out and kill us all out in the street and say that you're a divine person of God. I mean, it don't make sense. It really don't. So to convince me to go to your churches, you get all these women all the time. Well, my church ain't like that. They the first ones that come and defend their pastors and singing these songs. First ones. Oh, my pastor's not like that. Oh, no, you can't. You're not talking about my pastor. Yes, I'm talking about your pastor because your pastor is selling us out, giving us these old time religions, having us singing these old time religions, and then go behind with the white politicians and sell out the whole black race. Yes, I'm talking about your pastor. Yes, I'm talking about the pastor at the A&E church in Selma who invited, what's that man's name? Uh, the former mayor of New York down there, and where those black people in his congregation turned their back on him. That's a pastor who what? Sold out his people, sold out the congregation. Don't be telling me what your pastor is not doing. All kinds of sleeping with all the women in the congregation and fornicating. And then I'm supposed to be sitting up here in your church listening to this old time religion. Give me a damn break. The ideal here is that we live in a society of hypocrisy. Everything has to be turned backwards in this country. Okay? Our educational system is keeping our kids dumb. The justice system must stay unjust. Okay? The healthcare system got to keep us sick. Economic system, we're going to remain poor. And the religious in the church got to be what? Ungodly. Okay? That's the only way that a so-called free society to exist. It only basically respect those people who are what? Doing the wrong thing. You understand? The ideal here that we're going to be making progress by basically just relying up on civil rights laws and then having to go to church and say, well, why do we have to share this piece of pie and everybody else get a whole one? Oh, hell no. Didn't, and the reason why I'm asking the question, do you think that I'm asking the question because I'm immoral? No, I'm asking the question because, as Amos Wilson taught us, we paid the price. We fought in every war this nation has had. And yet, white people have constantly and consistently turned their back on us. Period. They have basically allowed everybody else in this nation to basically get the fruits that we're supposed to be enjoying today. That's what the civil rights laws in the 1800s, the is it the 12th, 13th, and 14th amendment was about. It was about us being included in the economic system. And I keep on trying to tell black people we can no longer live off in no $1.3 trillion. What the hell can we do now with $1.3 trillion? And we're about to lose that because the people who are sitting on most of that money, i.e., Oprah, example, who's the her? Who was her $2 billion going to go for? She don't got no kids. So where is her $2 billion? I'm just giving an example. Where is her $2 billion going to go after she died? I'm just asking a question. Where is her $2 billion going to go? Who is going to be owning the OWN network after she passed? I would like to see that half as will. Can anybody tell me how? Can I basically have what they call it, the Freedoms and Information Act? Can I really see what's in Oprah's will after she passed? 9 times out of 10, it's going to be held up in probate court, given to some white man. Where is now? We look at this and we see that our wealth is gone. The $1.3 trillion, as Dr. Claude Henderson taught us, is that we have to now start practicing group economics. Jewish people basically they make sure that their money don't reach no black community. And yet they be trying to come over here and pretend like they struggling with us. Nah, You see, and this along with the same thing with the Hispanics. See, this black and brown coalition is going to get us in trouble. The biggest problem black folks have is thinking that we got friends. We ain't got no friends. This is dangerous to say that we have a black and brown coalition because we have seen in history that we have not had no friends. I told you in my last commentary, remember when the Native Americans, when they signed the law that you're supposed to let the slaves go? The Native Americans didn't even want to let the slaves go. You're like, what the hell? Here's a piece of legislation that says that slavery has ended. And these people said, no, we're going to keep on, we're going to hold on to the slaves. Oh, no, wait a minute now. You see, so we have to be mindful of history so that it doesn't repeat itself. And that's exactly what's happening. With our $1.3 trillion, we are in trouble, black folks. And people out here talking about, nah, we all good and we're going to survive. No, we're not. No, we're not. Okay? We only got $1.3 trillion and we're losing that. We are not good. Period. We got to come up with something right now as a way to keep our to increase our $1.3 trillion. Because, like I told you, white people are only going to come out here with pseudo official stuff. They're gonna start knocking. They have started knocking down monuments of General Robert E. Lee and all that. That's only symbolic gestures. That's not money and wealth. As soon as you start talking about financial resources, white people just leave the room. You're like, where the hell did all the white folks go? Because tangible is what is important. When I told that white lady who showed up at my door that I am not going to vote because your system is illegitimate, she kept saying, oh, lawyer, I understand. Oh, lawyer, I understand. I know that black people are hurting and stuff like that. And but if we vote, maybe if we get John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock in there, they can change the Senate and we can have that stimulus package. The hell with a stimulus package. They're already talking about only giving you $600. That's no money. You see? That's the reason why we got to stop singing this old time religion stuff, because it is getting us in trouble. We are headed back into slavery. Let's go on and talk about the other issues here that's going on. Okay? We had basically wasted a lot of time after Reconstruction, where we had businesses, of course. We had our own neighborhoods. Okay, we had banks. Okay, we had credit unions set up in the 1920s where white people had to come and borrow money from us. And of course, if we went farther back, as I told you before, when the Freedmen's Bureau was set up, the Freedmen Banks was set up, and I told you about my article in my commentary where I said about how white people basically stole the money that they were supposed to be managing in these Freedmen Banks after the Civil War ended. So white people have had a history of stealing our stuff. And so what we have to understand is that their jobs is not going to, basically, give us power. I told a woman the other day, and I love black women to death, but when they get these jobs, they become so arrogant. And I try to explain to them is that yeah, you got your degrees and you know what I'm saying, you're independent and blah blah blah. And you're driving this nice car, you live in a big old house, even though you're by yourself, you got it made. You're good. You're looking at the black dude out there on the street that he ain't got no money, he's begging for money. You're living good. Fine. Okay. But when it all comes falling down, as Kanye said, okay, you lose your job, your car get repossessed, you lose your house go into foreclosure. Now it brings you what? Back into reality. Okay? And I told you, I try to tell women who are coaching and consult that your value is not based upon relying upon on a job, because your stature could be basically destroyed with your boss. Your white boss is telling you you're fired. You understand? You see, men, we think different. Okay, oh man, it's going off of YouTube. Go ahead and go on Lawyer Henderson TV on YouTube to finish the lecture here. Or you can come back in about 5 minutes. I'll be back on Instagram and it will continue if you want to stay. But Instagram is saying, man, you speaking so fiery, I gotta let you go. But on YouTube, it is, I mean, on an average though of your jobs, it does not create stature at all. Your jobs do not basically, get you in that position of high stature. And black men, we understand that. I'm not saying that there's no black women who don't, but we understand as men in general that your stature is based upon what you do as far as what you're building for yourself. That's what your stature come from when you're elevating yourself into something. And your mothers are telling you that you are the prize, and that a man will love to get you because you're in the church, and of course you're singing an old time religion. You're basically, being manipulated. Well, not manipulated, but you've been miseducated to think that you can be the prize based upon having jobs and going to church. Okay, go listen to Jason Black's podcast on high value women, and you will learn straight quickly as to what that real meaning is supposed to be defined. I think here that what we lost out when we went to church, when we was young and we started to go to church, we started to basically think that our our stature and our value can be presented only if we had faith and we had religion, and we did this and we had a nice job, we got a degree. A lot of us got masters or doctorate. Black people are heavily educated in this country. You got more black women who got degrees, who's educated. In fact, you have more skilled workers coming out of slavery than you had white workers during slavery as well. High valued skilled workers. And yet, the system again, and white people in the system, make sure that all of those skills was utilized, and then here come another redistribution of wealth. It is always happening. This is what this COVID-19 thing is about. Another what? Redistribution of wealth. So now there is an issue here of going back to the civil rights generation, the NAACP, the Urban League. You got the Rainbow Push Coalition. You got the Nation of Islam. You got what's this other one out here? Al Sharpton's National Action Network. You got all of these civil rights organizations. And the civil rights organization is not teaching and educating Black people specifically, because the ideal was to never ever teach Black people specifically as a group. Okay. Like I said, all of your civil rights organizations have been multicultural, people of color, all of these broad and ambiguous language and terms. And so when we go to church, we think that it aligns ourselves in the civil rights movement, and thinking that just because a white Jesus is on the church, oh, that means that white people should have all the power. No, does not mean that. So the question is, have black people made progress in this country? Have we made progress after 50 years of civil rights? Okay, the long march for civil rights. Have we made progress? I don't think we've done. We have not, because as Dr. Claude Anderson points out, we still make up 1.5 or 1% of the world economic system. The same 1.5 or 1% after the Civil War. So we have not progressed at all. And the reason not progress is because we have allowed certain people, certain organizations, and certain folks to basically remove us away from the truth. And of course, as you know, the truth has no moral stand in this country. But the article from CBS News did a poll to suggest whether or not have we made it progress in civil rights or since the civil rights movement. And they surveyed, I think it was 1,009 people got surveyed. So our fair use here, 50 years after the Civil Rights Act, America see progress on race, July the 1st, 2014, by Sarah Dutton, Jennifer DiPino, Anthony Salvinto, and Fred Backus. 50 years after signing of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, majorities of blacks and whites think real progress has been made in getting rid of racial discrimination, but most say at least one discrimination still exists today. African Americans are most likely than whites to see discrimination as widespread. You see, let's stop right there. Here, the white media is going to try to convince us that these 1,000 people make up a total whole of a nation by telling us that there has been progress after the 1964 Civil Rights Act. I beg to differ. The most more than 3 in 4 Americans, including most whites and blacks, think the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act was very important even in the U.S. and even in U.S. history. Another 19% call it somewhat important, and just 5% do not consider it important event at all. Wow. Let's come back to that. So we're stopping right there, and let's talk about that 50 years after civil rights. The article goes on to say from CBS News, credited with fair use here, nearly 8 in 10 Americans think that there has been real progress since the 1960s in getting rid of racial discrimination. Just 19% say there hasn't been much progress. The percentage that says progress has been made has remained fairly consistent in recent years, but it has increased nearly 30 points since 1992. Okay, so just 19% say there hasn't been much progress. In other words, you got to look at who the people that was in the survey. Okay, because they have not been asking the grassroots anything, we would have told you the truth. There has not been no progress made, especially if we have $1.3 trillion per year. Article goes on to say, though, that views on progress differ by race. Okay, no Sherlock. However, whites, 82%, are more likely than African Americans, 59%, to think real progress has been made. More than a third of African Americans say there hasn't been real progress. Well, of course, if you are the ones in control and got all of the money and manipulate us within the system to your advantage, of course you will think that. But few, just 5%, the article goes on, think of all goals of Martin Luther King in the 1960s civil rights movement have been achieved. 38% think most of those goals have been met, but 52%, including 63% of blacks, think only some of the goals of the civil rights movement has been achieved. Moreover, most Americans say discrimination against black exists today, and blacks are far more likely than whites to think it is pervasive. 41% of blacks say there is a lot of discrimination against African Americans today, compared to just 14% of whites who say that. In other words, they basically brought on some so-called some white conservatives here who basically have taken off their robes here. I mean, taken off their white robes from the KKK. You see, it's very dangerous to basically survey white men when they don't want to basically, admit the truth or anything here. 50 years after the signing of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, most whites, 63%, think both blacks and whites have an equal chance to get ahead in today's society. But fewer African Americans, 46%, share that view. Blacks are more likely than whites to say white Americans have better chance to get ahead in today's society than black Americans. Duh, they're sitting on $100 trillion. We talked about that in many instances. This poll was conducted by telephone June 18 through the 22, 2014 among 1,009 adults nationwide. Data collected was conducted on behalf of CBS News by SSRS of Media, Pennsylvania. Okay? But if we go back to Reconstruction, it shows you that we shouldn't have to have a civil rights movement in the first place in the 1960s, because we've already had one during Reconstruction. So picking up on my article in Reconstruction, it says, according to The View, radical Republicans in Congress bent on punishing defeat Confederates, established corrupt Southern governments preceded over by carpetbaggers, unscrupulous Northerners who ventured south to reap the soul of the office. Scallywags, which was called Southern whites who supported the new regime, and free African Americans unfit to exercise democratic rights. The heroes of the story was the self-styled redeemers who restored white supremacy to the South. That's what our problem is. White supremacy. Reconstruction actually began in December of 1863 when Abraham Lincoln announced the plan to establish government in the South loyal to the Union. Lincoln granted amnesty to most Confederates so as long as they accept the abolition of slavery, but said nothing about rights for free blacks. Rather, the blueprint for the post-war South, this war was a measure in efforts to detach whites from the Confederacy. And in Reconstruction, as one other gesture, Lincoln's ideal evolved. At the end of his life, he called for limited black suffrage in the post-war South, signing out the very intelligent pre-war free blacks, and those who served our cause as soldiers as most worthy. See? So you had the 1867 Reconstruction Act, and Andrew Johnson vetoed it. 15th Amendment extended black male suffrage to the entire nation. 1865 Civil Rights Act, 1865 Voting Rights Act, 1865 Civil War Act. So Civil Rights Act of 1875, the U.S. legislation and the last of the major Reconstruction statutes, which guarantee African Americans equal treatment in public transportation and public accommodation and services on juries. The U.S. Supreme Court declared the act unconstitutional in the civil rights cases of 1883. You see, so the U.S. Supreme Court has never, ever been black folks' friends. The U.S. Supreme Court is the supreme white supremacist organization, and along with the federal government in general, has helped to basically maintain white supremacy within its structure. We're going to talk there about other things here. Go ahead and hit that thumbs up button, hit that live button. Don't forget to subscribe. So we're going to also go back to the civil rights. See, this is what we've been telling you. You see, we've been playing games with religion. You know, one of the biggest reasons as to how the white Jewish people could basically destroy us is because they use this Bible as a way to manipulate the people who they're trying to get money from. I mean, they will sneak in any place where black folks are trying to congregate and strategize. Here come the Jewish people, because the Jewish people have often been the ones who basically help to supplant white supremacy within the country. You know, after their ordeal with Hitler, that's one of the reasons why Hitler was basically wanting them out of the way, because they knew how sneaky the Jewish people, once they galvanized to power, would have done. So we can go ahead and say that what the Germans did to the Jews in Nazi Germany is the same thing that white people are doing to us in the United States. But you have to also watch out for Jewish manipulation as well. And this is something that Michi X also, she basically was talking about as well. Okay. This is what Farrakhan sometimes talk about. When you talk there about civil rights, I wanted y'all to go back to an article from the New York Post. I'm going to give them credit, because how many people know, if Governor Cuomo, is he somewhat kin to the Kennedys? I don't know, but we're going to read this article, and the article says, diary bombshell, RFK slams against Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, and Governor Cuomo. In other words, you see, we have Al Sharpton here again. Okay, and let's talk about what they said here. It said that the Post exclusively reported how Robert F. Kennedy Jr. grappled with what he called his lust demon and kept a scorecard of more than 24 conquests in a secret diary. A follow-up story provides insight on his celebrity connections and perks of privilege. Below are more sensational details from the journal, in which RKF Jr., Robert Kennedy Jr., a member of the political elite, bashes everyone from then brother-in-law Andrew Cuomo to the Reverend Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson. Over breakfast of New Year's Day of 2001, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his brother-in-law Andrew Cuomo sat down to talk politics. See, this is why Andrew Cuomo is going to run for president, right? Cuomo tenure as a Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development was to seek the Democratic nomination in 2002 and blunder badly. His criticism of Governor George Pataki and the after-shouted liberal slogans bluntly revealed the silent truth, feelings about some of the most important political figures of our time, including family members such as Cuomo, fellow Democrats, and President Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. RFK Jr. also kept notes for his journal during the month-long stink in Puerto Rico prison that July. He, the Reverend Al Sharpton, and Jesse Jackson's wife Jacqueline were charged with trespassing during the protest of, is it Vequas, the Puerto Rican island the U.S. Navy used as bombing range. The Reverend Jackson and Sharpton give me the creeps, he wrote in his diary. He goes on to call Sharpton a buffoon who has never escaped the stench of his advocacy for Tawana Broadley, the Black Dutchess County teen who fabricated a story about 6 white men raping her in 1987. See, they never let it go. He writes that Jesse Jackson has a desperate and a destruction addiction to publicity. He recalls that Jackson, at labor leader Cesar Chavez's funeral, pushed Caesar's friend and family out of the way to make himself lead pallbearer. His love affair with Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan and his Jewish uh, bigotry are also unforgivable, Kennedy adds. You see? They always do this. They never ever let it go. Kennedy responded on Sunday to revelation of his journal. The New York Post article is just really playing games here. Hold on here. Okay. Let's go back to what they were saying here. He even talked about Rudolph Giuliani's ass. Okay. It goes on to say that the New York Post had chosen to print excerpts from a 13-year-old diary illegally stolen from me. He said in an email, the diary served as a tool for self-examination and for dealing with my spiritual struggles at that time. It also contains unedited, unfiltered screams of consciousness, musing, and current events and people. Nothing in that diary was ever meant for publication. I have nothing but respect for Governor Cuomo, the Reverend Al Sharpton, and Jesse Jackson, all of whom are distinguished themselves as extraordinary national leaders over the past decades. Notice that he left out the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan here. But the journal, even former Governor Mario Cuomo, who was Kennedy's lawyer in Vequa's case, is not spared criticism. Cuomo, the father-in-law of his sister Carrie Kennedy at the time, was working on a deal to spare RFK's junior prison time in case. But the environmentalists seeking to shine a spotlight to endangered species in the region insist of being treated like other protesters. End quote. Okay. So that's what we have here. We have a system that has been for a long time dealing with all kinds of things here. Hold on, sorry, but we had a system dealing with a long time of these types of beliefs. That if we could basically look at the civil rights generation for what they have done and to keeping us without real progress here. The civil rights generation had basically made sure that if only a certain number of them can just get a piece of the pie from Master's table, then that will satisfy the rest of us. You see, the grassroots, we're bringing that to an end. We're bringing that into a situation where that's not going to work for the majority of the Black community, because you're not supposed to just go into the house and just get something for yourself. It is for the people. You're supposed to be making sure that the people are straight. And that's the reason why civil rights leaders, excuse me, civil rights leaders, politicians, and other people, and them knocking on our door talking about vote for Raphael Warnock and John Ossaw and Stacey Abrams and all these other people, that's not going to get us in the door. You understand? That's not going to be the way for Black people to gain power in America. We got to stop listening to certain types of people when they talk about just going out there telling us to vote. Your pastors have sold us out. And the reason why they're selling us out is because they can maintain a tax-free code, the tax code that gives them a write-off of the money that if that as long as they still preaching that old time religion, they can basically make sure that they will stay within what the white government want them to basically talk about. You should love your enemy, turn the other cheek. You should basically not basically you should not disobey your masters. You see, this old time religion has gotten us in so much trouble that we're not prepared to basically have the tools necessary in order to build ourselves economically up. And this is why, and Black people are afraid of dying, but you are dying and killing each other over tax returns. But you're not dying on the fact that you want your freedom and independence from white supremacy. That's a problem. You see, we basically been going through this ever since the United States been a nation. And Farrakhan talked about, well, we were using our churches for liberation, which is true, but we couldn't really liberate ourselves if we're going to continue to sing the same songs here over and over again. And so with Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson now out the way, because remember, we told the civil rights leaders and all the ones that white supremacy is trying to basically prop them up to be the new ones, that game is gone. I talked last week, of course, about, remember, the 19 so-called Black economists. Remember I talked about that last week? And out of the Black 19 seconds. We got 19 seconds. Oh my God. I didn't know we were short on time here. Okay, so we got 90 seconds because we're short on time, but we're going to continue this topic next week. Everyone, thanks for joining the Lawyer Henderson Show. We're going to continue this topic next week, and hopefully we'll do a part 2. Sorry that I was not able to get no calls today, but we will continue to pick this up next week. Thank you all for joining us.